It's a really special place in that it is really wild, one of the last truly wild places. It's also still a working landscape where humans live here, living off and with the land.
We all work together, but truly respect our natural resources and like to see them not only thrive, but expand in a sustainable way long term.
We've used both sides of the mountains for millennia, and we see the importance of working with folks on the other side of the mountain because it's part of our Aboriginal territory and it's part of our ecosystem.
Located within one of the last intact large landscapes on the planet, known as the crown of the continent ecosystem, lies Montana's Seeley-Swan Region. This region lies between two wilderness complexes and consists of two different watersheds, the Swan Valley, which flows to the north, and the Clearwater watershed, which flows to the south. The rural communities who live and work within this landscape are primarily engaged in the economies of the timber industry, forestry, outdoor recreation, and conservation, and are largely dependent upon the rich biodiversity that thrives here. The connected habitats that sustain these species, some of which are endangered, continue to prosper due to the proactive human efforts made by those who have strong connections to these lands. This coexistence will only endure if those efforts continue and are supported. Human connections to this land began over 10,000 years ago. While it was primarily the territory of the Upper Kalispel, the Salish, Kootenai, and many other Indigenous tribes interacted with and stewarded these valleys. Indigenous relationships with this region continue today through ongoing cultural connections and ecosystems that span current tribal jurisdiction. The Flathead Reservation, home of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, lies directly over the mountains to the west and holds the nation's first tribally managed wilderness. In the late 1800s, with increasing encroachment by white settlement and resource industries, the U.S. military invaded and forced native tribes in the area onto reservations. The treaty guaranteed rights for tribes to continue traditional practices on ancestral homelands outside of the reservations were suppressed, often violently. This suppression occurred in the Seeley-Swan region partially in response to private interests demanding protection of the timber in the region, which they now saw as a commodity. Throughout the 20th century, the Seeley-Swan was primarily managed for timber harvesting, which continues today. In the 1990s, Plum Creek Timber Company, which at the time was the largest private landowner in the country, transitioned into real estate development and began listing tens of thousands of acres for private development. The threat of subdividing and habitat fragmentation brought together unlikely partnerships of residents and groups with varied interests, including loggers and conservation advocates, who were all concerned about the sustainable future of the region. After years of public and private efforts, from grassroots level to national, a deal was reached in 2008 for the remainder of Plum Creek's lands. This came to be known as the Montana Legacy Project, putting over 310,000 acres in the greater region of Montana into primarily public lands and conserved spaces. The success of the Montana Legacy Project was dependent on the collaborative groups who had already been working for years in the region to build a culture of shared stewardship, watershed by watershed. Swan Valley Connections is one of the locally led organizations that carries on this legacy today. They work to inspire a healthy coexistence of people and place in the Swan Valley. They coordinate resources to carry out programs on the ground, including public outreach concerning living in bear habitat, wildfire fuels mitigation, responsible timber harvesting, citizen science, and educational programs for all ages. Swan Valley Connections proves that locally led collaborative efforts are critical to creating healthy lands and communities.
Nothing we do is without partners. It's all about relationship building and trust and nurturing that. That takes a lot of time. We need to have the patience to come together with curiosity, we can then open ourselves to hear those other perspectives and find some sort of middle ground. Being willing to learn together in public is really key. And as conditions change, so do the things that we know, and that's part of the need for collaboration. All of our experiences of living and working in this wild landscape makes it really important for people to bring their knowledge, their passion into the room so that we can work together. It's really important to be present in decision-making opportunities, being a part of public comment periods, being on city councils. We work hard to get our county elected officials to come out to the far reaches of the county out here because it's very different than it is in the heart of Missoula, for instance. Nobody knows a place better than the people who live and work there. The Swan watershed is the wettest in the state of Montana, with 16% surface water and more than 4,000 wetlands. We have 93% public land, so that allows for a lot of rare animals and plant species to exist here, including kind of the full suite of Montana carnivores, grizzly bears, wolverines, mountain lions, lynx, and a host of other animals that have mostly free movement. It is a wild place to live. The people here are independent thinkers and also always come together as a community whenever it's needed. We are headwaters into the Flathead system, and Montana as a state is the headwaters to the continent. We have the opportunity to demonstrate what healthy waterways look like. As the climate is changing, as we see climate refugees that want to move into these wild places that have an abundance of water, without careful planning and acknowledging that ground to surface water connection, we run the risk of running out of water. It's not an infinite resource. There's a real need to continue to fund research and monitoring so that we can come up with solutions and we can inform those policy decision makers about what's really happening on the ground. I'm a real believer in trying to nurture our adaptive management skills. Change is constant. How can we be resilient in change? We're all here, no matter what your species, to learn and teach one another. So we are on what we call the Elk Creek Conservation Area. It is 640 acres that Swan Valley Connections owns and manages in partnership with the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes. Elk Creek is the primary bull trout spawning tributary in the whole Swan watershed system. Swan Ecosystem Center approached the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes understanding that bull trout is culturally significant, as is water very culturally significant to the tribes, and wanted to offer a partnership opportunity to them. We're always working together to try to improve this piece of property, whether that's to increase the diversity of the native plant species, to using it for educational purposes, and always keep this waterway clean, cold, connected, allowing it to utilize its full floodplain by not building any structures ever on this property, and let it be its wild, beautiful self. Part of Swan Valley Connections' values is valuing traditional Indigenous knowledge and trying to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into all of our work. And so we are constantly learning and look forward to continuing to learn and bring those learning opportunities to a greater public. Frankly, we're overdue in honoring and living in more of a community with Indigenous peoples. As an organization, ours and others, it's also really important to not just have one tribal member or one type of person, not just any one belief system, age, gender. We all belong. We're all a part of that interconnected web of life. While we try to increase the Earth's capacity, we increase our own capacity for learning and partnership.
I'm a Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribal member. I'm born and raised here on the Flathead Indian Reservation. Spent a lot of time with the elders when I was younger. Really learned the importance of taking care of the land, being connected to the land. Historically, the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes had a very large Aboriginal territory. Seeley-Swan was important for many reasons.
When I've interviewed my elders about traditional uses of certain areas in Aboriginal territory, they talked about the Swan Valley as being really important for big game, bear, elk, and such. And there's a lot of culturally modified trees back there too, that the bark was taken off for the use of food, for cambium. There was large stands of white pine. We used the bark off of those white pine for canoes.
It was just the main travel corridor and part of the area that we called home. So our reservation border ends on the tips of the missions and follows the ridgeline south. We've used both sides of the mountains for millennia, and we see the importance of working with folks on the other side of the mountain to make sure that our treatments here don't stand alone and their treatments there don't stand alone, that we cross boundary, we work in collaboration. Currently we're working with TNC, BLM, within the Swan area over there to bring fire back to some of their land, to rejuvenate that ecosystem there. We work well with all of our neighbors. It's learning both ways. We see it as important to us because it's part of our Aboriginal territory and it's part of our ecosystem.
For over a century, forest management on the Flathead Reservation was held by federal agencies. In 1996, management was transferred to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, who had stewarded these lands for thousands of years.
Our forest management plan is a very unique blend of Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. So when we developed our plan, we really wanted to get away from production forestry. We see what the land needs. It's based on ecosystem balance, wildlife needs, even cultural use. We try to incorporate all those components into every plan. Every community member, non-tribal and tribal, they have some input of what goes on up here.
Since time immemorial, Indigenous peoples of the region understood fire as a necessary component of healthy forest and grassland ecosystems. Oral histories and scientific evidence show that for thousands of years, the vast majority of fires in these areas were intentionally set by Indigenous peoples for specific land management purposes.
Traditionally, wildfire was allowed to burn on these lands, and historically, our tribe set prescribed fires for different reasons. It could be for hunting and grazing areas. We would set them at the right time of year for berry picking. And a lot of times it was for maintenance of campsites, for grazing of our horses. We'd have a firekeeper that would go around these different areas, and based on, the traditional ecological knowledge of knowing when to burn, what areas to burn, with the understanding that fire is part of this ecosystem and understanding the use and the good of fire.
With the influx of white settlement in the mid-1800s, government officials frequently suppressed wildfires and restricted Indigenous peoples from carrying out traditional uses of burning, often using direct violence. In 1910, massive wildfires burned 3 million acres of the inland Northwest. The devastating scale of these fires was due to a variety of factors, including the previous decades of fire suppression and the resulting buildup of fuels. After the fires of 1910, U.S. Forest Service management further ramped up tactics to suppress wildfire. Today, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Forestry Department is reintroducing their traditional relationship with fire into their management plan to restore cultural uses of areas, improve the health of the ecosystem, and to reduce the risk of catastrophic-sized wildfires. They also use strategic thinning practices which promote the health of old-growth forest ecosystems and lowers the intensity of prescribed burns.
When we do a project site, we like to consult with our elders, getting that culture involvement, learning from our elders of different management areas, what that area used to be like, what would its function, what native plants were there, helps us guide our treatment plans. We're still learning from our ancestors.
What I've seen is once we introduce fire into the landscape, the vegetation gets renewed. It increases the browse species for animals. We've seen native plants come back that were laying dormant. With the reintroduction of fire, we lift all the branches that are available to a flaming front up, so the trees have less ability to torch. It's very evident in this particular stand. If you had a fire in here, it would typically just be a surface fire now. If we want to protect our resources from wildfire, we got to reintroduce fire. Welcome to a fire-dependent ecosystem.
Our forests are finally catching up to that impact of fire suppression over 100 years. Fire season is getting longer with climate change, and that aligned with the structure of the forest right now, with the density. It's really setting it up for big events.
You look at fire seasons of today, and I like to compare them to when I first started, and it's not even close. It's crazy how early the fire season starts, the type of weather that we've been getting. This year, we saw a shortage nationally of firefighting resources. It draws more importance on the interagency relationship. We all come together and we talk about the fire season. We start talking about resources that we have, fire danger that we're looking at. We call in resources from different agencies, tribes, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Eastern Oklahoma region, Navajo region. They come in every year, and the reason we ride with that group, they know our ground, we know them, and the relationship's established that we work well together. On the other hand, now they're in trouble, they're having hard times with their fires, so our resources are down there helping them.
That's the importance of collaboration, of seeing a bigger picture. It's not just ownership of parcels, it's not productivity of forest logging, it's ecosystem balance and restoration needs of the landscape.
What's unique about Seeley Lake is the fact that here everything can coexist. We have a great recreational attraction with the lakes, and in the wintertime there's cross-country skiing. It's a small community, everyone knows everybody, but truly respect our natural resources. And it's a matter of working with others and coming up with projects that actually benefit all the different interests that exist.
Pyramid Mountain Lumber is the largest employer in the Seeley Lake area and the oldest surviving family-owned lumber mill in Montana. Since it began operations in 1949, Pyramid has deemed itself the Forest Stewardship Company, understanding the interconnectedness of landscape health with the sustainability of natural resources and community well-being.
Working at Pyramid, our owners definitely emphasize community involvement. When they posted the job, and one of the key things they said was you have to be part of the community. We want to help our employees and keep Seeley Lake thriving. We may only have 120 employees, but we support probably double that outside the mill in terms of those loggers and the businesses and the landowners and the Forest Service.
Most of the harvesting that occurs in the whole Seeley-Swan Valley is kind of selective harvesting. It provides long-term benefits for wildlife, recreation, as well as raw materials in the future. You're doing other things other than just harvesting sawlog-sized trees. Improving streams for fish passage and dealing with legacy roads that produce sediment or bull trout streams. All of Seeley Lake is occupied grizzly bear habitat. Certainly road density is an issue. So if part of a project we can obliterate some roads, in a thoughtful way. I think there's ways of doing things that benefit other interests. What's interesting about Pyramid Mountain Lumber, we've never owned any of our own land. Therefore, we're totally dependent on all our forest landowners, federal, state, private, tribal. And so developing long-term relationships with a wide variety of interests have been incredibly beneficial. We can't do this by ourselves. We got to develop partnerships with other folks with different interests where we can come up with objectives on the ground where everybody sees some part of their interest in the end result. It's very important that a collaborative is balanced, meaning you've got environmental interests, you've got community interests, resource interests, all kind of working together and looking out for each other's interests. Over the course of time, that's exactly what happens. The other venue that's out there is the collaborative process, to get someone locally to kind of convene stakeholders. And you may only meet once or twice. You have some discussion, go on a field trip, provide some input, and then you disband. So you don't have to meet every single month. I chair the Montana Forest Collaboration Network, but right now there's 23 collaboratives I think that provides a good medium to have a good conversation about how do we grow the footprint of collaboration across Montana and elsewhere. Pool resources, do something that's really at a landscape level that makes a difference. Pyramid Mountain Lumber joined the Sustainable Forestry Initiative in 2010, and the Sustainable Forestry Initiative is an international certifying body. We stay up to date with growing environmental kind of issues and concerns, climate change and biodiversity, to apply that to not only how we look at things, but how we communicate with other landowners. There is a new standard coming up that deals with climate-smart forestry. And a lot of that revolves around basically mitigation and adaptation. We need to keep our forests healthy, and if we thin out our forests, trees grow faster, they get bigger faster, store more carbon, rather than let all the fuels accumulate and then go up in smoke.
The community of Seeley Lake has experienced multiple area wildfires throughout the years. In 2017, the Rice Ridge Fire burned 156,000 acres from July through September and threatened Seeley Lake's town center.
Those fires really brought an awareness to the community of this is really dangerous. We've got to do something about it. We need to maintain our forests so we don't burn down.
The more we can manage, the less catastrophic wildfire there is. And instead, let's use prescribed fire. This site right here is one of the sites when the tribes came through, they stopped here and they would burn this area regularly. Tribes have used Montana's forested land forever. A significant amount of our volume every year comes from tribal sources, which we're very dependent on. They do a great job managing their forest land.
The Clearwater Resource Council is another group that was involved in the success of the Montana Legacy Project. They're a resident-driven organization which creates programs and local engagement around topics of water quality issues, community development, and ecosystem health in the Clearwater Valley.
We are located in Seeley Lake, which is in the heart of the Clearwater Valley and the Clearwater watershed. And what really makes the Clearwater unique is its long string of lakes. The water resources here provides the unique wildlife habitat for a whole host of creatures. I would say it's a disparate community in that you have a community of retirees who tend, for the most part, to be in the upper economic demographic. And you have local folks, sometimes who have been here for generations and are mostly working folks.
The year-round population of Seeley Lake averages 2,000. In the summer months, the population swells to over 6,000, and several 100,000 tourists visit the area. While tourism creates a beneficial boost to the local economy, this influx can also create pressures on the community and the environment. The region's attraction for seasonal residents and remote workers has created a severe lack of available and affordable housing for local working residents.
If we want to keep folks on the landscape, and if we want to make housing affordable, and if we want to make sure there are jobs, and at the same time protecting the environment, we're going to have to work hard at that. It doesn't just happen. And you have to involve those folks who live there. It's really important that it's a collaborative effort rather than a top-down effort. Clearwater Resource Council wanted to contribute to climate change mitigation in a meaningful way. And so currently we're working with the Missoula Electric Co-op, the Bonneville Environmental Foundation to facilitate the solar installation here in Seeley Lake. Bonneville Environmental Foundation would provide $50,000 to offset the cost to purchase panels to low-income residents. We can address some of the equity issues that have plagued and are plaguing this community. The solar panels, if you buy one, give you a monthly rebate on your electric bill. Our hope is that we will encourage other folks to install solar installations on their own private homes. I don't think climate change is anywhere near as controversial as it was 10 years ago. I think the greater challenge is what do we do about it and what does that look like? And you need to start thinking kind of creatively. So it's our job to educate folks and say, yeah, this is happening, but we can make it a little better. There's lots and lots of impacts, but I mean the two that I think are most evident is longer, hotter, drier summer seasons, which translates into more risk for catastrophic wildfire. CRC has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars working with community members to mitigate their properties and to reduce the threat of wildfire. The other thing that is really significant is that we've had an uptick in blue-green algae blooms. While not all blue-green algae is toxic, it certainly can be toxic, and the impact to waterfowl and the impact to even terrestrial species who drink from a fouled lake are deadly. This means that folks pulling their water from the lake can no longer pull their water from the lake or have to be very careful in the use of that water. We're trying to study that more, so this year we're doing a full baseline analysis on all 6 major lakes. It is important for people to kind of understand that natural world. I think if we don't connect people and they don't see the importance of it, then we're going to continue to lose natural resources on the landscape.
A sense of place is very important and is part of my teachings. A sense of place is being greater than just, oh, this is a pretty landscape here. There's a deeper story which makes the landscape kind of come alive better. Those stories are culturally relevant to our tribes, the Salish, Kootenai, and the Kasanka people. Our sciences and our connection to the landscape are embedded in those stories. A lot of the place names of these areas, they can also be descriptive of what kind of resources are there. And if you imagine us traveling through the mountains here, the Mission Mountains, all the way to the Rocky Mountain front, where you got the Missouri River, the Musselshell, the Yellowstone rivers, all those areas, we have place names out there. There was important resources that we were going to. And to have the many data sets in your mind to be able to identify those plants and to be able to be there at the time of maturity and at the right time to collect and to process those resources took a great amount of indigenous sciences, and it was developed over thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years of knowing a place, of being part of this place, that helps you to feel and to be a part of this landscape, to where you can start defining where you are in this cosmos and your relationship to all that's around you. My personal connection with the environment around me has led me to work with our youth and to work with our families on the reservation to help them make that connection with their culture and with the environment around them.
Tim conducts Indigenous educational outreach through many avenues, including leading the Mission Mountain Youth Crew.
The other partners were the parents that encouraged their kids to enroll in this program. We had 8 reservation youth involved with this program for 7 weeks during the summer months, and we did forest restoration work, everything from opening trails up, cleaning campgrounds, studying insects, to banding birds, to snorkeling into the rivers and doing fish surveys. We also did cultural resource management work too, which I was able to convey to them the history and the traditional uses of these areas. That's another opportunity, is that they understand their Aboriginal territory and not just the reservation. And so try to get them to feel some ownership. When we're brushing out and opening up a trail that was used by our ancestors, I want them to realize that and reflect on that and feel like, okay, my ancestors are here with me. We had a participant, she said, wow, I can go home and I can tell my parents about this. I can tell my friends about this stuff now. And the Mission Mountain Youth Crew was formed not only to make that connection with the environment and the community, but also to make the connection to their future careers and what they may aspire to. The important thing is realizing your own worldview and where do you stand. With that is the consideration of your family, community, and the world in general and your effects on it. And if we can truly embody that belief and that feeling that we are part of everything around us, that we would start thinking more seriously about polluting our lands, our endangered species, animals that are disappearing from the earth because of our effect of climate change and how that's affecting everything and everyone on this earth. How it affects us culturally, we need to be conscious of that. In a community, in a tribal unit, everyone was valued for what they contributed as a team, as a group, as a community to move forward generation upon generation, and here we are. Where are we going in the future? You know, that's a huge question.
I have spent, my adult life in this incredible state, and to be in the Crown is amazing. I just hope more people just recognize that coming together is the only way that we're going to get anywhere. Rural communities, I think, really show that. You might be completely politically opposed, but if somebody's house is burning down, your enemy is going to be the first one there to help put it out. Why does it take tragedy for us to come together? How about we come together to prevent the proverbial fire? I just think that the only way we're going to make it as a species is to come together.